Member for Devonport has the call.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the member for Carvel and Narangba for their help in calming things down, matters such as I've already spoken. Mr Speaker, I rise to speak to the Statutes Amendment Mineral Resources Bill. It pains me immensely to advise the House that after considerable research, discussion and angst, I cannot in all conscience support this bill. I will not oppose the bill in this second reading, but reserve my right to oppose the bill in the third reading, subject to the progress of amendments flagged for the committee stage of the bill. As a former state president of the Liberal Party as late as last year, and a long-term member of and volunteer for the party, it is instinctive for me to support the Liberal Party. Accordingly, it is incredibly difficult for me to not support this bill, but I am convinced that, in the words of my late father, I am, quote, doing the right thing. Before moving to briefly cover the reasons for my stance, I wish to pay tribute to Premier Stephen Marshall, Minister Dan Van Horst Pelican and all of my colleagues in the government. I greatly appreciate that we have conducted matters in a mature, constructive and respectful manner. I have sought the consideration and adoption by my colleagues of a variety of models and/or regimes, principally but not exclusively related to land access. I thank the Minister and my colleagues for the favourable consideration of one of my suggested amendments pertaining to exempt land. Although I have been largely unsuccessful in my attempts, everyone involved in this debate have been without exception polite, gracious and respectful of our differing opinions. I remain proud to be a part of a government which is delivering for South Australians and which is being led and run by our Premier in the finest of Liberal and Westminster traditions. By way of personal background, as a Liberal, I love that we stand for liberty, for small businesses and for property rights, and especially the right to have and espouse a view. I am pro-mining and pro-agriculture, but most of all, my highest loyalty is to the people in Devonport and the people of South Australia. Agriculture and mining have played a big part in my life. I grew up in the country. All four of my grandparents came off farms. My dad worked at Kamantu Copper Mine in the early 1970s, driving a 100-tonne Terex truck and operating the drilling rigs in preparation for blasting. It was comparatively well paid but dirty and dangerous work. It has closed and reopened over the years due to the fluctuation in copper prices. He went on to work for many years at Horwood Bagshaw Limited and then later with Class. I too worked for Horwood Bagshaw as a young man. I grew up in the town Mannum, in which Horwood Bagshaw is based. It may surprise my friend the member for Hammond to learn that Horwood Bagshaw also had a mining division in my time with them, making successful underground ore loaders and importing the Live Here range of construction and mining equipment. Growing up, the pre-Christmas period in my home was filled with frantic after-hours phone calls to our home from farmers from the Wimmera, the Mid-North, York Peninsula and Eyre Peninsula, placing spare parts orders in order to get harvest done. Drum bars, concaves, straw walkers and my personal favourite, the riddle box, and innumerable other parts were ordered and delivered post-haste. Such was the importance of the harvest. I have an affinity for the vagaries and special needs of both industries. I have accordingly sought, unsuccessfully, a harvest moratorium whilst this bill is being considered. Turning to my electorate, it has a substantial amount of agricultural land in the Hills area, especially around Cherry Gardens. Devonport is home to the historic Mount Malvern silver and lead mine, which opened and closed on at least 5 separate occasions between 1859 and 1925. That particular mine, and especially its tailings dumps, were apparently the cause of the moat around large parts of the Happy Valley Reservoir. The moat is designed to channel runoff water, including that from the tailings which still exist away from the reservoir itself. Mount Malvern, whilst now in private hands, is 4 kilometres up the hill from my home, and I note the member for Hyson has also referred to other mines in the area, primarily the silver mine at Scott Creek. So much for the background. Turning now to the problems I have with this particular bill, primarily fall into 3 categories. The first is land access issues, which in particular, in my view, means people are not put first. This, in turn, leads to conflict. Everyone knows the farmers are often preyed upon, predominantly by unscrupulous explorers, as distinct from miners, and no one cares, or if they do, not enough to actually do anything about it. There are no industry codes, and little prospect for the perpetrators of any censure or court action. It is literally the Wild West. No one, not SACOM, no government department, is either sticking up for farmers in their battles or preventing them from being preyed upon. No one. The members for Narungga and Mount Gambier have provided us with graphic examples of the total disregard shown by some miners and explorers and the complete lack of any meaningful redress. The second problem I have insofar as this bill before the House is its structure, and in particular, or especially, the extensive use of regulations and ministerial determinations, and I'll detail that further. And the final issue I have is one of process, the process that we followed. Turning now to land access, mining and agriculture are both vital state industries and have been for many years. This is true today with Roxby Downs and the Broadacre farms on the Yorke Peninsula and Eyre Peninsula, as it was with Moonta and Burra and farms on and around the Adelaide Plains 140 years ago. Since the 1880s, legislation from this place has always rendered agricultural land exempt from mining, usually evidenced by some sort of test of the use the land is put to, and if it was cultivated or had features supporting cultivation, for example dams, etc., then that land was exempt from mining. That is, being very clear that the state's right to enable the access to any minerals on a property was always limited if the land was agricultural land. Over time, there's been a continuous erosion of the real value of that exemption, such that it is now often close to worthless. It's worth reiterating at this stage that minerals in a property are still always owned by the state of South Australia and its people, rather than the landowner. There is, however, a substantive difference for some landowners. Let's take an example. A churchyard, schoolyard, graveyard or backyard, they are all exempt from mining, always. A farmyard, on the other hand, is exempt too, that is, until one of 2 things occurs. The owner is forced to court to hand the land over for exploration and or mining, or the owner is threatened into signing a waiver enabling that access by way of relinquishing their exemption, which anecdotally is very common. The end result is the conflict or competition we see between the 2 parties, farmers and miners explorers, for access to land. That conflict persists with this bill. There is additionally argument made to support the status quo, insofar as land access is concerned, which goes that the state owns the minerals and therefore farmers should always give way to activities which liberate or explore those minerals. That is true, but by the same token, the state also owns any minerals under Rundle Mall or St Peters or your home or your business. Their existence does not automatically mean that they have to be exploited. Exempt means just that in these cases. Why not for farming land too? To be crystal clear, I want more mining in South Australia, but not at the expense of people, as is the case now. It is possible to get this fixed so that both agriculture and mining can move forward. It is way past time we addressed it. Turning now to the people. Simply put, the people who live and work on these farms are South Australians just like us. They are predominantly family-owned small businesses. They are in many cases multi-generational, the property and the businesses having been handed down from one generation to the other. They deserve to be able to live in their homes and go about their business without being dragged to court or threatened with legal action unless they acquiesce and allow some other group of strangers onto their property. Everyone knows this is happening. No one is doing anything about it. This is not addressed in this bill, when in my opinion it should be the first item we deal with. In my maiden speech in this place, I set myself a standard of, if not us, then who? If not now, then when? If this was happening, people being harassed in their homes, lied to, threatened in suburban Adelaide, there would be an uproar. This behaviour is a direct result of the existing Act, and the new one will, if anything, make life harder for these farmers, in my opinion. The vote on this bill is therefore, in my view, a vote on whether these farmers, these South Australians, deserve better. I think they do, and I will vote accordingly. Moving to the structure of the bill, in consideration of that, much of the provisions in the old Act will now be moved into either regulations or ministerial determinations under this new bill. This effectively means that whoever is in the minister's chair will have greater discretion, but with that comes less accountability and transparency. Changes are far easier to make. Today's debate shows the value of Parliament operating as intended, an open battle of ideas conducted by people representing the rights of their constituents. That is our job description. A move to devolve much of the machinery of the Act to regulations, especially many of the provisions pertaining to land access, decreases transparency. It effectively removes those provisions from parliamentary scrutiny and oversight. Mr Deputy Speaker, by way of example, the steps required under the new Act to cancel a waiver that has been granted, that is to say, cool off on the waiver, are enshrined in the current Act, but under the new Act they are removed and will instead be embedded into the regulations. They are harder to find, they are subject to change, they are therefore harder to do. What a surprise. Moving now to the question of process. Perception is reality. There is a strong belief in sectors of the community that there has been insufficient consultation and insufficient time to consult on matters regarding this bill. This is obviously a subjective metric, but I reiterate, perception is reality. My preference is that we would consult further, if only to address those perceptions. If we must have much of the detail of the new Act buried in regulations, let's consult on all of those too. And finally, Mr Deputy Speaker, insofar as next steps are concerned, I will continue to seek to work productively with the Minister and other stakeholders to seek to improve this bill, in particular provisions and associated remedies which improve the equality of treatment of all landowners. I am encouraged in this regard by discussions with the Minister and the prospect of further legislative developments pertaining to this matter. I will continue to put my constituents and the broader South Australian community first. I came to this place to get things done and to do what I perceive to be right. I shall continue to seek to do, as my father instructed, the right thing. Thank you.
Member for Hammond.